In a bold and shocking move, President Donald Trump announced that Venezuela will turn over up to 50 million barrels of oil. That's nearly $3 billion worth of oil headed straight to the United States. But this isn't just about oil. This is about control. It's about power. And it's about the sovereignty of nations. Venezuela, once a global oil powerhouse, now stands on the brink of collapse. Its vast reserves, holding the largest proven oil stockpiles on Earth, are now largely untapped, decaying. So why, at this exact moment, has this decision been made? Why now? The truth is, this is more than just a business deal. It's a high-stakes game of influence, manipulation, and dominance on the global stage. Let's pause for a moment and take a step back to understand how we got here. What Trump has done is not merely an economic maneuver, it's a geopolitical statement. By seizing control over Venezuela's oil, the US is reshaping its influence in the Western Hemisphere and sending a message to the rest of the world. For years, Venezuela's oil reserves have been trapped under the weight of political instability, economic collapse, and international sanctions. This once thriving industry, which could have fueled the country's future, is now just a shadow of its former self. Yet, even as Venezuela's oil industry falters, it still holds vast potential. The largest oil reserves in the world remain underground, waiting to be unlocked. And with that potential comes immense power. The question, however, is not just about the oil. It's about who controls it and what happens to the millions of people who rely on it for their survival. Let's take a closer look at the history behind this decision and why it's happening now. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must look at the history of Venezuela's oil. In the early 20th century, Venezuela was one of the world's leading oil exporters, an economic powerhouse fueled by its vast reserves. For decades, the oil industry powered the country's economy, lifting millions out of poverty and creating a middle class that thrived. But everything changed in 1976 when Venezuela nationalized its oil industry. From that moment on, the state controlled the vast majority of the country's oil wealth. Fast forward to the early 2000s, under President Hugo Chavez, Venezuela took an even firmer grip on the industry. Chavez's policies, while popular among the poor, alienated foreign investors and caused production to decline. By the time Nicolas Maduro took power, Venezuela's oil industry was already in free fall, exacerbated by international sanctions and corruption. Now, with oil prices in the global market surging, the question is, can Venezuela's oil be revived? But before we can understand the challenges, we need to examine the crisis that sparked this intervention. The first crisis in this saga came not with the announcement of oil transfers, but with the dramatic removal of President Nicolas Maduro. This wasn't just another regime change. It was a military operation backed by the United States to overthrow a sitting president. Maduro's rule had already been marred by widespread protests, economic collapse, and an exodus of millions of Venezuelans fleeing to neighboring countries. The tipping point came when reports of drug trafficking, corruption, and Maduro's ties to international criminal organizations began to surface. For years, Maduro's government had defied international pressure, clinging to power with increasing brutality. But when the US took action, it signaled a new phase in the struggle for Venezuela's future. This wasn't a peaceful transition, it was a high-stakes, politically charged intervention with massive implications for both Venezuela and the US. And the world watched as the US imposed its will on the region, sending shockwaves across Latin America and beyond. What comes next will shape the future of this oil-rich nation and the power dynamics in the Americas. To understand the full implications, we must dive deeper into the hidden mechanisms at play. At the heart of this crisis lies a hidden mechanism, the vast, untapped potential of Venezuela's oil. While the country's production has plummeted, the US sees a gold mine waiting to be unlocked. But it's not as simple as just drilling oil. Venezuela's oil is heavy and difficult to refine, requiring advanced technology and infrastructure that has long since fallen into disrepair. But the real challenge is political. The Venezuelan government, under Maduro, clung to the belief that it could maintain control over its oil wealth despite the world's growing demands. Now, with the US exerting influence, the mechanisms of international politics and corporate interests come into play. American oil companies are looking at Venezuela's reserves, but they need stability. They need a government that can guarantee contracts, safeguard investments, and avoid the risks of further instability. For the US, this isn't just about getting oil. It's about creating a foothold in the region and using Venezuela's resources to fuel its own energy security. And that's where the stakes become truly high. Venezuela's oil is now a tool in a larger game of international chess. But there's more at stake here than just economics. What happens to the people of Venezuela? As the US tightened its grip on Venezuela's oil, the second crisis unfolded not in the boardrooms of oil companies, but on the streets of Venezuela itself. Maduro's removal triggered protests, resistance, and violent clashes. Venezuelans, already burdened by years of economic hardship, found themselves facing an uncertain future. The promise of stability and prosperity under a new government now felt hollow. In the midst of this chaos, the country's oil workers, the backbone of the industry, were left to pick up the pieces. Many had already fled the country. Others faced uncertain employment, as the government, now led by interim President Delcy Rodriguez, struggled to maintain control over the national oil giant PDVSA. The question is simple yet profound. Can Venezuela's oil industry be restored while the country is in such turmoil? The US is betting that oil can be the key to the nation's revival, but the reality is far more complex. The oil isn't just a commodity, it's a symbol of the power struggle, the future of a country teetering on the brink of collapse. But as we explore the crisis from the perspective of the people, we need to understand the global impact of this conflict. For the people of Venezuela, this crisis is not just about oil, it's about survival. Every barrel of oil represents a lifeline, but also a future filled with uncertainty. The promises made by both the US and the interim government are hollow for the millions of Venezuelans who have lived through years of shortages, hyperinflation, and violence. Imagine a family struggling to make ends meet, now hearing that the very resource that once fueled the country's economy is being handed over to foreign powers. What happens to them? How do they rebuild their lives when their country's wealth is controlled from abroad? Venezuelans have already lost so much. Their homes, their jobs, their dignity, and now they watch as their national assets, once their pride, are sold off with little promise of change in their day-to-day lives. This is more than just a political story. This is the story of a people caught between the weight of their history and the chaos of their future. But while Venezuela's people suffer, the world's leaders are watching closely, and the ripples of this conflict are being felt far beyond Latin America. The consequences of this crisis stretch far beyond Venezuela's borders. As the US moves to take control of Venezuela's oil, the geopolitical ramifications are felt across the globe. China, for one, has condemned the US actions, calling it a blatant violation of Venezuela's sovereignty. The Chinese government has long been a key partner for Venezuela, investing billions in its oil industry. But now, with the US demanding exclusive rights to Venezuelan oil, China faces a difficult decision. Will it stand by its longtime ally or back down to avoid further diplomatic fallout? And it's not just China. Russia, Iran, and even Cuba, all of whom have close ties to Venezuela, are watching closely, knowing that any shift in power here could alter their own strategic interests in the region. This conflict is creating a new set of alliances and rivalries, ones that will shape the future of global power dynamics for years to come. But the story doesn't end here. We need to look ahead to the future to see what might happen next. As we look ahead, the future of Venezuela and its oil industry hangs in the balance. What happens next? There are three possible scenarios, each with its own set of consequences. The best case scenario, the US and Venezuela strike a stable agreement, oil production ramps up, and Venezuela's infrastructure is rebuilt with the help of international investment. The country slowly recovers, lifting millions out of poverty. In this scenario, both Venezuela and the US benefit from the oil, and a new era of cooperation is born. The middle ground, Venezuela's oil production stabilizes, but the country remains politically unstable. The people continue to suffer under poor governance, and foreign investment comes in slowly with significant risks. The US may get its oil, but the cost in human lives and diplomatic relations becomes high. The worst-case scenario, Venezuela descends further into chaos. Political infighting, economic collapse, and violence become even more widespread. The US and other powers vie for control over the oil, but none of them can stabilize the country. Venezuela's resources are drained, and its people remain trapped in suffering. The choices made today will shape Venezuela's future, but they will also define the future of global energy, diplomacy, and power. The crisis in Venezuela is far from over, but one thing is clear: the world is watching. What began as a struggle over oil has transformed into a battle for influence, sovereignty, and the very future of a nation. Venezuela's vast reserves of oil have become a powerful tool in the geopolitical game, a game where the stakes couldn't be higher. For the people of Venezuela, this is a battle for survival. For the US and other powers, it's about control over the flow of energy and who holds the cards in a rapidly changing world order. But as the dust settles, one question remains: what will happen to the people caught in the middle of this power struggle? Will they be the beneficiaries of the resources that lie beneath their land, or will they continue to bear the weight of a broken system? This is not just Venezuela's story. This is the story of power, control, and the future of global politics. And it's a story that is still being written. Stay tuned, because what happens next could change the world.